And so welcome everyone for coming to this. We love having you here. Thank you so much for showing up for this really very important and different webinar that we are doing. And Dr. Nobles, thank you for doing that. That's lovely. And so let me do this. Let me do my very brief intro. Let me just quickly give you here's what we're going to have a conversation about very, very quickly. And then I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists here. So I'm Jonathan Klain. I'm our Director of Risk Management and Safety Education at BioRaft. And I work in the field of EHS for longer than I would like to admit. And that's probably more than enough. Most of you know me, I think, by this time. Anyway, so this webinar that you're on is really devoted to looking at what is the possible overlap, collaboration, opportunities, synergies that one might find when one sort of overlays both safety culture and what we are calling JEDI culture. And JEDI, of course, is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I didn't share my screen, which had my little Superman and Batman Legos with their little joke there. So I should do that at some point here. But I really want to keep everyone's face where they are so people can see our wonderful panelists. Oh, and thank you very much for posting the Menti poll, Chris. Yes. So a conversation with my dear friend, Dr. Anthony Appleton, who suggested this, begat this, and then I turned quickly to ask my former colleague, but also a great friend, Dr. Renetta Tull, and then quickly my manager, John Zybel, quickly said, and Jonathan, you said you wanted a third. I know exactly who this is going to be, and we reached out to Dr. Robert Noble. So let me introduce the three of them. And I'm just going to keep mixing up the order here, folks. So I'm just going with what I got on my page here. So let me start with my former coworker, if I can be so bold as to call you a former coworker. I worked at the same campus for a while. So Dr. Renetta Tull is the University of California, Davis's inaugural Vice-Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI, as you often see it abbreviated. And what does that house? That houses academic diversity, the Office of Campus Community Relations, 4 different centers, health equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is within the medical school, nursing school, and health centers, right? She was formerly the Associate Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives at UMBC, which is University of Maryland, Baltimore County, if I found that out correctly by looking it up, and as director for the University System of Maryland. And her roles there included serving as co-PI or PI on many proposals. I don't know what they all stand for, Renetta. You can always talk about them as you wish. AGEP, Advance, and LSAMP proposals. And she's PI at UC Davis for the Promise Engineering Institute, and her degree is in electrical engineering, speech science from Howard University and Northwestern, and has had faculty roles at UW-Madison, University of Maryland College Park as well. And so as Chief Diversity Officers for the Council for the University of California System, an adjunct professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at UC Davis, international speaker on global diversity in STEM, was Global Engineers Dean Council and Airbus Diversity Award finalist, received the ABET Claire Felbinger Award for Diversity and the Student Platform for Engineering Education Development Global Mentoring Award. She was part of the Consensus Committee for the National Academy's Impact of COVID-19 on the Careers of Women in Academic STEM, and is part of the International Federation of Engineering Education Societies community. And research interests are humanitarian engineering, continuing through sharing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, I know, applause, Robert, thank you. And speaking of Robert, Dr. Robert Nobles, who has 2 degrees that I aspire to. He has a master's in public health and a doctorate in public health, which you rarely see. He serves as the Vice President for Research Administration at Emory University. I will just do a nice shout out to Emory that my cousin Stephen graduated. He got his medical degree at Emory, and he actually spent his entire career serving underserved populations in New Jersey. So thank you very much, Robert, for what you have done and how that trickles down, and it fits in with what we're talking about. Well, at Emory, Dr. Nobles leads research administrative and compliance departments, including clinical research, environmental health and safety, the IACUC, Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, Research Administration and IT, Research Administration Services, Research Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, Research Grants and Contracts, Sponsored Programs, Strategic Operations and Training and Technology Transfer, with more than 450 team members providing outstanding services that catalyze research and operational excellence. Robert, I don't know how you get any sleep at night being responsible for all of those areas. Oh my goodness. And then, and last, I come back to my dear friend, Dr. Anthony Appleton, who really gets full credit for suggesting this when I came to him and said, Anthony, what should we do about safety culture to really embrace things? And Anthony was the one who suggested this. So let me tell you about that. So Dr. Anthony Appleton, who has a PhD, is the Research Safety Culture Program Coordinator. I love this, a liaison style position acting as the ganache between researchers and the various safety and compliance units at Colorado State University. I'm really hungry now. The Research Safety Culture Program has won multiple national awards for innovation and marketing involving researcher training that includes a focus on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI resources. Anthony truly believes research safety is not just the researcher. Research safety is the entire community involved in research. And I know this very well because Anthony is now also the co-lead in the SHEMA, Campus Safety Health Environmental Management Association, Safety Culture Community of Practice, which I did have the honor of co-starting with his co-lead, Joan Wilkerson. So, hey, thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Let's really get talking. Let me get you all talking first, right, or next. So since we're talking about this, what is that overlay like? You know, who are the marginalized, disenfranchised, underserved, underrepresented, you know, fill in the blank here as you wish, please, populations that you have seen that really are very much an overlap. So now that our attendees know this, how do you see the relationships between the frame is the organization's overarching culture, and then you have these subcultures under it. You have safety culture and you have JEDI culture within it. So that's a lot. Feel free to go in whatever direction works for you. Just out of convenience, I'm going to go in that same order again. So Dr. Tull, if you don't mind starting, please.
So I think the interesting thing, first of all, Jonathan, thank you so much for inviting me to participate. And Anthony, thank you for sort of having the idea to have this as a panel and a discussion for 171 participants. And I'm happy to be here with all of you. So I think an interesting thing, just to sort of start off the conversation when we talk about safety culture and JEDI, adding the justice in with the equity, diversity, and inclusion, from my perspective, I would like to see these things put together and not thought of as something separate. A lot of times when we hear about diversity training, implicit bias training, or other kinds of things that connect to inclusion, people tend to think of them as add-ons or something extra or something that's going to take more time or something that people don't necessarily have time to do connected to whatever their discipline-specific job is. And when we think about humanity, when we think about the safety of people, both in a physical way as well as a psychological way, I think that DEI kinds of issues really need to be integrated strongly into these cultures. And so my hope from this conversation and from the discussion that we'll have is that at the end, we will begin to think about JEDI and safety culture together, something that goes together, something that is not an add-on or separate or extra or a burden, but rather something that is essential and integrated into the very edicts, agendas, training measures, et cetera, that we're going to do for all of the people in our labs, our organizations, et cetera.
Great. That was a great start. Thank you so much, Renetta. Well, Dr. Nobles, Robert, from your perspective at Emory and all, what do you want to add to this, please?
Yeah, and thank you. Renetta started out by thanking you for allowing us to be here with this audience. What I would say is this, is that when we talk about our safety culture and being one of the authors of APLU's Guide to Laboratory Safety Culture, I would say that what we often do and what we often miss are the voice of the collective group. And so we put together policies. We are anxious to ensure that leadership is informed related to safety culture and safety practices, and believe that the tone is set there. I've seen alternate models where students and graduate students came together at the University of Minnesota and put together working groups to really push the institution to care much about their safety. And I've talked to countless chemistry departments and other academic departments related to wanting to do what's right and what's best for their populations. The challenges when we think about our cultures at our institution is that not all voices are at the table to be heard. And so one of the things that we're gonna have to do is be conscious about looking around and thinking holistically about our populations for which that we serve, and asking ourselves who's not at the table. Because one of the things that I've shared with laboratory safety professionals over time is that they tend to be incredibly competent, and the communication streams throughout the institution, they're almost like invisible superheroes. They like to do their work in the shadows. They like to protect people, and there's not a lot of visibility. And what we need to do is bring our safety cultures out of the shadows and make sure that the individuals that we're protecting are also heard.
Excellent. Love that. Yes. And Anthony, one quick second. I love the conversation going on in the chat. Please, everyone, continue with that. And then we also, and see, there you go. And Patrick posted to the chat. Thank you, Patrick, a dear friend as well. But I also wanted to remind people that, we'll go through about 2/3 to 3/4 of the hour having this rich conversation, and we do want to get your questions. So feel free for the questions you want that the panelists to address or answer, whatever. Please do make sure you put those in the Q&A for us, as usual. Thank you. All right, Dr. Appleton, my friend Anthony. So what else would you like to add to this? And you, again, as I've said, really are the genesis. So I know you have some good experience there at CSU on this.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for being here. It's great to be with Dr. Nobles and Dr. Tull. I would like to echo what Dr. Nobles said, where, and Patrick had noted this too, where top-down leadership. So here at CSU, we have excellent leadership at the executive level around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we make no bones about it that it's a priority of our institution. And because we have that leadership coming out of the president's office and the Office of Inclusive Excellence, I'm allowed in my program to easily integrate these two things because it's already part of our culture and people want to see it. And it's so much a part of our culture at CSU that we have multiple PIs that actually publish at the intersection of STEM research and JEDI efforts. And so, it's just a wonderful place to be at CSU, where we're meeting these challenges head on. We don't hide from them. I think that was, made a point by everyone so far, that you really have to discuss these issues. And so really echoing that you've got to have people on board. You have to have support from the top, because they're going to set the priorities, and they're also going to tell you what is valued. And if you work at an institution and you want to be promoted and you want to work your way up that institution, you will do what's valued. And so when leadership says JEDI is valued, safety culture is valued, that's an easy marriage of those two worlds.
Great, thank you, Anthony. That was great. All right, so let's talk. And I'm sorry, I can't remember who mentioned it, but probably several of you actually. What about the issues and challenges of visibility versus invisibility from these perspectives? We have different communities, and they may be present. I can see them, but I think you can help our attendees really grasp what it is like for some of these communities that really are unfortunately invisible very much of the time. And just to mix it up, I'll start with Robert this time, please, Dr. Nobles.
Yeah, no, Robert is fine. Trust me, I was Robert way before doctor.
Thank you so much.
So I think when we talk about visibility and invisibility, I think the individuals that we want to garner and gain their attention from to understand the hard work that's going on is both academic and administrative leadership. We need to gain an understanding. And the one thing I would tell, because this is primarily safety professionals, is one thing that we should know definitively is when does the president, the provost, or other leaders of the institution want to be contacted when there is a negative event that happens on campus? And do you have a mechanism of doing it? If someone died from a safety issue on campus, do you have the capability of contacting leadership at your institution to make sure that they're aware before it shows up in the news or they're contacted from another source? And if the answer is no, then you need to streamline your communications to your leadership, because part of this discussion is elevating the voices and empowering the people for which that we serve. But oftentimes what happens in environmental health and safety is that we haven't elevated our own roles at our institution, so everyone knows the value of what you do each and every day. And so to be able to elevate others and serve as that beacon, you have to be able to ensure you have a direct line of informing leadership of events, negative events, positive events that happen at some routine basis. Now, that's visibility of environmental health and safety. Then we go into visibility of those that for which that we serve. What you'll find if you're not conscious is that events happen at your institution. And the institutions that have robust near miss systems in place are the ones that are well informed of the possibilities of risk, and those individuals are more attuned to ensuring that they have a rapid feedback loop. For individuals that don't have a robust near miss system, what happens is that they rely on the trickling in of information or the annual inspections that occur, and your communication channels with your departments, with your schools, with the voices of individuals across your institution. You're probably scammering, you're hunting for where information is received from your office, and so that means there's some work that needs to be done to shore up your communication channels. Then that gives you the platform to elevate the missing components: international students, junior faculty, undergraduates. You have to figure out how people can have voice, but you have to make sure that you have your communication channels in place, both top and throughout the institution, to be able to find the missing individuals.
Absolutely, yes. All right, that was great. Anthony, would you continue along these themes from your perspective, please?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to touch on about visibility and invisibility is that, sometimes we get caught up in alphabet soup. And so we're taking care of this issue, that issue, and going there. And we forgot that there are researchers and people who support research who have chronic pain or who have ADD or ADHD. Students who are undergrads that once had accommodations have now become graduate students, and they don't know how to navigate those same accommodations at their institution. And so when we talk about invisibility, I want to make sure that if I see someone in a wheelchair, we have an understanding of how they would traverse a building. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I see someone walking, that that person is always capable of opening a door or using the stairways. And so I always try in this area of visibility and invisibility to ask people either to do this or to do it themselves. And whenever you're working with someone, ask them, how may I best support you? And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times we get caught in a tough spot where we don't want to ask a question a certain way. But if we lead with empathy and with the idea of learning how to help this person, it's going to become a better situation. And you're going to open yourself up to this conversation where you're going to learn things that you didn't see and how best to support, whether it's a researcher, it's a faculty member, or it's a support staff structure. You know, that is a great way that you could begin that conversation.
Great. Thank you so much, Anthony. That was great. Renetta, what about from your perspective, having such a huge portion of what you do having to do with all of this? I'd really love to have you kind of capsulize this for us.
Yes, well, first of all, thanks to Robert and to Anthony for what they have added to the conversation already. And I really like something that Anthony said when he said, how can I help you? And that kind of leads into my thoughts. I think one of the things that I try to help teams with and help our different schools and colleges with is that different identities and the diversity of people, that this is a good thing. And that there can be a tendency to want to put everyone in a box to say, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see difference, but that actually erases the beauty that people have within their individuality. And so sometimes I think people want to make differences invisible because they think that it is uncomfortable, or they feel uncomfortable with recognizing the difference or with even celebrating the difference. But differences can be celebrated, identities can be celebrated, whether it's, as was mentioned, disability, racial, religious, gender, etc. With even the piece about how can I help you, giving people an opportunity to share how they would like to be addressed. You know, for example, if they want to use certain pronouns, etc. There are all kinds of ways that we can honor the individual person. And, you know, there is a term that a group in Canada used at a recent conference, and they talked about the right to comfort, and that it's okay to challenge one's right to comfort. We don't have to necessarily be comfortable all the time when we're trying to right size, or we're trying to make sure that everyone is included and that everyone feels visible. So we have to make sure that there are the things that we are doing on our side, but that those efforts are being received on the other side. So we could be doing a variety of things, but if the people don't feel that they are being acknowledged, that they are visible, and if we're not checking to ask the questions to develop that human relationship to find out, then we may be missing the mark.
Let me jump in just real quick, because I think it's important to hone in on this point that Renetta was making. When we talk about the empowerment of the invisible group, part of what we need to do is we need to share with all groups what your safety culture is. And it's very interesting, because when I started teaching many years ago, I had an anatomy and physiology lab, and coming in, new teacher, professor, they say, oh, you should give, you know, the first class, half class, you should give a safety talk. And so then you develop it yourself, and then you give your safety talk, and then you move on to discussing the systems. And what became curious when I became an administrator is that we rely on each one of those individual faculty members to come up with their own message related to safety. And what we don't do as an institution is collectively give a cultural a cultural video on safety that actually empowers individuals, let them know that it goes well beyond that classroom setting. It goes well beyond that laboratory setting. It goes well beyond your own research setting to a broader institutional culture. And since we haven't made individuals aware very early on, right? We stumble upon them during inspections, or they might hear a statement from leadership related to the value of safety. Everyone thinks it's someone else's responsibility to actually empower the individuals to report. And so there's this constant disconnect between the populations, our groups, and the expectations of the multitude of groups of who is going to relay the message and where is the information going to go. So I think just like with anything, if we want people to be aware, you have to say it, and then you have to say it again and make sure that people understand, and then you tell them that you told them what the culture is.
Excellent. And I like the crosstalk too, as well, which I always want to encourage amongst our panelists for a richer conversation. And we're having that in the chat as well. And a gentle reminder to folks, the chat has a way of scrolling away from us. So questions that you really want them to address, please put them in the Q&A, folks. Thank you so much. So I'm going to kind of combine a couple of thoughts here, something I typically do. It usually drives the panelists nuts because they're not sure what direction to go in. But I'm like, go in whatever direction works for you, and they relate. So let's talk about the crossovers between these two cultures and what those maybe conversations are like, because some of the stuff in the chat is about how do you have the conversations. Some people are receptive, as we can see. Some other people are not, as I'm sure we've all experienced. The questions people ask, maybe each of you, and any ideas and thoughts that you would like to share. And I can't remember who I went to last. I think, Anthony, you're up first this time, but I'm not totally sure, but that's the way we're going anyway.
Yeah, I actually think these two systems and these two schools of thought cross over extraordinarily well. Because when you think about JEDI, you're really thinking about a person's safety, the value of that person, what they bring to the organization, what you can learn from them, and you realize that there is a personal affirmation that's going on. And what happened in science and STEM research was we were so focused on process safety. And now we're starting to move from process safety to personal safety. And that personal safety is the overlap with JEDI. And I think that we all see this, whether we cover accidents in academia, deaths in academia, that when we study these, the process was one thing, but the personal side really opens the communication bandwidth, allows people to feel like they can report because they feel valued as an individual. And so I think both systems will positively affect each other when one starts building on the other. And as Dr. Tull said, you got to think of this as one unit. Because if you try to build them independently, you're not getting the synergy of the two units together.
Yep, very well said. Thank you, Anthony. Renetta, what about from your experience, this whole thing of overlap and the conversations, et cetera?
So let me share, I think, from some of my experience with some safety talks and safety culture talks that have happened at universities where I've been involved just a little bit. So I've been involved at the University of Maryland Medical School for some of the summer programs that they've had with students who are coming into a laboratory culture, and the same thing at MIT. And the interesting thing that I saw often was that a lot of the rules and regulations were not always very clearly articulated. And there were assumptions that people had already been in either a laboratory environment or a similar environment. So therefore they didn't need that much of a background or that much grounding, I should say, in the safety culture itself. And then when people wanted to ask questions, they were nervous about asking questions because they didn't want to be seen as being, in a sense, unworthy of being in that kind of environment. And so I think one of the things to recognize is that, people, especially as we are making sure that there is inclusion of a variety of different cultures and backgrounds in our work, that there are different cultural norms as well. And sometimes in some cultures, there can be a reticence to actually ask questions or to ask, what should be done or what can be done. And so making those things clear, thinking about making sure that there are a variety of different modalities. So when we talk about identities, and I think this might go back to something that was also said earlier, we can think about different learning styles as well. So there's some pedagogy that goes into this as well. When we think about learning styles, those who are auditory, those who are visual, et cetera, and making sure that things are put forth very clearly and communicated very clearly in a variety of ways. And then that there's some feedback so that people know that they can ask questions, along the way, that all of those things are really important. So there's a level of inclusion, I think, that goes into safety culture with making sure that everyone who's going to be operating in that space feels included as a participant in whatever the work is going to be, and thinking about how they are receiving the information, but also how they can interact in order to make sure that they are safe as well as how that everybody else is safe.
Yeah, absolutely, and it looks to me like what you all are saying is resonating very, very strongly with our attendees. A lot of great stuff in the chat, as you're all seeing as well, especially about psychological safety and just culture and all of this, and how they really do align. And so, Robert, what about on this overlay and the whole issue of conversations? I don't think I've gone to you yet, but if I'm mixed up, please help me out.
Oh, no, you haven't. I love the comments from Anthony and Renetta. I really think it's a provocative question, in truth, right? Because when you go past the superficial layer, what Anthony and Renetta said is absolutely true. Most of our institutions live in the superficial layer, and bringing a conversation related to DEI to scientific professionals that perform safety oversight activities at their institution, where they, for the most part, are a homogenous group, questions start to pop up. Because I've met with these groups, and inherently you would say, well, I'm not racist. Of course, my job is to take care of everybody. I'm a scientist. Why are we having this conversation? That would be where people live, because they're like, of course, but I think the challenge is, if we're not conscious about it, we have a blind side. And if we're not thinking holistically about the populations that we serve, and we're not asking the critical questions, people inherently will be missed. And so the reason why the question is provocative about of course, they should be intertwined. It is so difficult, especially in the last couple of years, for us to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion amongst the entire population and feel comfortable with that. It flows into so many other dynamics of individual makeups and politics and their life and where they live and what they see and their stereotypes and unconscious bias. It flows into all this other stuff that we feel uncomfortable with as people, to be honest with you. So then when you bring it into the workplace and say, okay, we're going to talk about this in the context of safety, it really makes people uncomfortable. And what I would tell the group is, I think because we must have the conversation, because our scientific hearts and minds are to protect the populations for which our jobs are here to serve, that we need to understand that being culturally different and the individuals who are performing the activities are different in themselves. They are a diverse population. There's not a lot of people like you. I'll tell the audience, there's not a lot of people just like you. Even though the external expression of who you are might look like other individuals, or the internal component of where you come from could be similar. There's not other people just like you. And so starting to engage in an open mindset that everybody you come into contact with is going to be different than who you are, and there's something to learn about how they communicate, how they navigate an institution, what their threats are to their livelihood and to their careers, it'll begin opening up the door of how do you extract voice from them. I think of course it should be integrated. I think we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and be open to what we learn in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Robert. That's great. It's been interesting listening and then also seeing a lot of the sidebar in the chat, a lot of people contributing, golden rule, platinum rule, etc. So why don't we expand out a little bit here? And we've been talking a lot, I think, about how this benefits the individuals, but let's also expand out, how does it, and you've started to talk about it, all three of you, how does it also benefit the richness of the institution, maybe from the research perspective, since that's also an overlay, a commonality for the three of you? What are some of the things you have seen? And I know each of you have perhaps like a win, a story, an experience, et cetera, that you want to add to this discussion. So think about those as well. According to my notes, Renetta, you are actually up first. So please kick us off.
Wow, you know what, there's so many themes sort of going on right now, themes and sub-themes. And so let me go backwards with the theme about the win for the institution. So first of all, I think when you focus on individuals and again, sort of honor humanity and honor the humanity of people, then it's a win for the institution because people feel engaged, they feel connected, they feel empowered in their work, and they feel valued for the talent that they're bringing to the table. And isn't that what we want, right? We want people be able to contribute, to feel comfortable in their contributions and to be able to do it in a way that's going to be of benefit to the organization, but also of personal value to themselves. In this conversation and in this discussion about value and also psychological safety and so forth, there's something that I wanted to bring forward because in my work, we often look at conceptual frameworks that have been developed in literature, and that sort of helps us with how we move forward in some of our work. And there's a particular framework that has to deal with the psychological sense of community. And so when you think of psychological sense of community, there are 4 different areas related to that. There's this piece about membership. And with membership, there's understanding boundaries, emotional safety, a sense of belonging and identification, personal investment. There's influence. Does everyone who is within that particular community feel like they have some measure of influence? In other words, even in a hierarchical structure, are there opportunities for everyone's voice to be heard? We heard Robert talk about voice in one of his earlier comments. But there's also integration and fulfillment of needs. That's the third one. And someone mentioned something similar in the chat to something that was written in the 70s, in 1974 by Saracen, who talked about this willingness to maintain or giving or doing for others what one expects from them. It's not just how we want to be treated, but how others want us to treat them, that has to be part of the equation. And the fourth piece is this shared emotional connection, which goes to talk about the effect of honor, the effect of honoring individuals for what they bring to the table. And so I think when we are able to do that, and again, going down into the deep layers, it sort of goes back to your first question, Jonathan, where you talked about, how does this filter through? So you have to have things at the top levels of leadership, but it also has to go all the way down. It can't just be left at the top leadership where leadership says, this is our mission, this is our vision, here are our values. And then it doesn't go anywhere. It just sort of stays at the top, sort of hovering as icing on a cake. Everything has to go all the way through. That flavor, if you will, has to go all the way through the entire organization, through every level, all the supervisors, all the managers, all the people who are doing the work, and everyone has to have the same level of value for these different tenets. And it has to be repeated. We often talk about, well, we've said that once. Well, once often is not enough. And we have to make sure that even though we've said it a couple of times, and it may seem like we're, as the term goes, preaching to the choir, we have to continue to make sure that the values are being espoused. So I'll and have our other panelists chime in.
Oh, thank you. Oh, no, it was excellent, Renetta. Thank you so much. Yes. Robert, from your perspective, and if you have, I think you might have like a micro story or 5 to tell us, maybe just one, unfortunately. Afterwards, maybe we'll have a couple of beers at the bar or something like that and swap stories. But I think you might have one that you'd like to share with us that I think would be very helpful in this case. So please.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the discussion of psychological safety, right? I was jotting down some notes. How do you build that at your institution? One is by establishing trust, but how do you do that? By having action when something's wrong, building accountability at your institution, that nobody's above the institution, learning from what occurs and not being punitive, and then disseminating the results so that everybody learns from that experience, not in a form of shaming. And so what I think about success, when I walk away and I say, you know what, I think that was done really well. One example that comes to my mind is that I had a junior faculty member who wrote a paper, and the journal wrote them back and said, hey, we need a copy of your IRB approval. And the faculty member called me because they heard me talking on campus, and they're like, what is an IRB? And I said, so what did you do? And they're like, is it some type of international body? No, I said it's an institutional review board, but what did you do? And then they went on to share that they read an article. They read an article. They were working on a phagocytotic cell that was going to eat viruses. And they read in this article that a good growth medium was cervical fluid. And so you're already saying, wow. So then I said, oh, okay, that sounds good. What did you do? How'd you get the cervical fluid? They said, oh, well, I collected it in my lab. And so I'm on the phone with this individual trying to get their article published. And I said, please, because I'm, being a scientist, I said, please don't tell me you did spinal taps of your students in your office. No, oh, no, it wasn't that. No, we would never do spinal taps. The other cervix. And so they said they asked the female graduate students and students in their labs and postdocs to swab themselves, go home. They signed their own consent form that they made. To swap, promise that they won't have sex for 2 days prior to sample collection so that they can grow the medium in the lab, and swab themselves, keep it in their own personal freezer, bring it back to the lab so that they can grow the medium so that they can have a good growth medium for these phagocytotic cells to eat viruses as part of their research study. And I I was like, oh crap. That is not, that was wrong on so many levels. And so this is one of the unfortunate events that they called, and they were trying to be altruistic. They were trying to figure it out. And we had to suspend the lab. We had to go in and do full laboratory safety assessments related to individuals. Clearly we had to stop the work. Clearly they didn't have IRB approval for individual sample collection. I have other stories related to that, but we could talk about it. And we had to retrain them on laboratory safety. The lab was closed for like 6 months. The individual was pre-tenure, so they were going up for tenure, and they didn't make tenure, and they thought it was because of the publication. So we worked with them to get everyone to repair the lab again, and bring everybody back up to a place where they could function in an appropriate fashion. But it gave us so much insight that there's certain subpopulations that have no clue. When you have engineers on your campus that think they can collect samples from wherever, they don't understand safety the way that your biologists and chemists and other individuals and then the other types of sciences would. And so we missed a whole group of individuals because we had no clue they would be engaging in this way. And so when students start to ask, when junior faculty feel empowered to ask you questions, even if they're in the wrong, that's when I think you're winning from an institutional level.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, it's amazing what can be learned by the things that go wrong. And I know that that's a hot topic for everyone here. It's been mentioned in the chat as well. And so I think your story, thank you again, Robert, for being willing to share it, illustrates that we do have to be willing to talk about these things that go wrong. We are all human, and we suffer the vagaries of making mistakes. I had someone in a leadership position who said to me when I came to him about a mistake a staff person made, he turned to me and we were talking privately, and he said, "You know what, John, I make more mistakes than anyone I know." And that has stuck with me, only because this is a public conversation. I don't want to say who that was, but they were at a very, very high level. And I think that these conversations are so important in that way. Anthony, what about you? And I think at CSU, you had a win as well that you'd like to share in this frame, please. And then we're going to have to quickly transition, launch the poll, and dive into the attendee Q&A, please. But Anthony, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so at CSU, we have a wonderful team that works on reducing sexual harassment and field campaigns where there are planes involved, multiple continents, tens to hundreds of members of teams. And, one of our top scientists experienced sexual harassment, and she was done and was like, we can do better. I know we can do better. So she got a social scientist and someone who does statistics together and found that there's a program that came out of Denver from a geology society that all they had to do was change the stories to the field campaign and what they were working on and to actually translate it. And I went to a graduate recruitment event, and a female recruit, was like, "Oh, what is safety culture? You sound so interesting. Tell me about you." And I said, "Oh, you got to meet Dr. Fisher. She, works on reducing sexual harassment field campaigns. These are things that are important." And the student said, "Well, I'm going to sign right now. If you care about that, and that is your safety culture, then I know I'm going to succeed if I come to CSU." And so, I think Dr. Noble said, we sometimes got to promote ourselves and tell people about what we do. And I completely agree with that. And our grad students need to know what they're coming into. Will they be supported or not? And it really does come down to the culture. I myself went through a graduate program where all of the Black females dropped out. How is that possible? Right? Like, how can that happen when they were all smarter than me and I made it through the program? There's no way. Something failed the person, right? The system didn't work. And so, you know, I'm really impressed with everything we've talked about today and the comments. And Jonathan, I'm really excited to hear this Q&A.
I know. Me too. And so I just posted in the chat. We collected, Anthony contributed an article. I had shared an article I found during a search through the DCHAS list, which I'm sure many of you subscribe to. I got some articles from my colleague and friend Ralph Stewart at Keene State. And so I just posted them for everyone. Hey, Brandy, so glad you liked the links. So let's try the Q&A. And Renetta, I do want to go to you first, because I think, you know, between what you were talking about before with psychological safety, which resonates so strongly in so many ways, and then Robert's story, of course, having to do with the female graduate students, and then Anthony's, you know, about it can't be possible that all of the African-American women somehow did not do well in this. And I was wondering, you know, if you wanted to add to that. So one of the questions, and this one comes from Carmen, is any recommendations on addressing higher management on inclusion initiatives for safety training? And while Carmen's question is about safety training, the overlay here, as you mentioned, Renetta, is let's not just take these and slapdash them on. Let's really fully integrate them, because that's really where we see the great benefits. And, you know, how do we treat each other? How do we make sure that these terrible things don't happen and we learn the lessons? I think that's plenty of space for you to go in. So I'll stop there, please.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Carmen, for the question. One of the ways that I try to encourage our different stakeholders is to look at what their individual discipline-specific organizations are doing and saying, particularly around issues of diversity, inclusion. I saw intersectionality was listed. There are other kinds of things related to basic needs that are listed, mental health, right? All of these different kinds of things, because sometimes I feel that our researchers and investigators are operating in a vacuum and feel, depending on the level, may feel alone, but want to share with other people in management, other leaders, what's going on. But I have often referred people to their own professional organizations to say, look what, you know, the national organization of, you know, whatever it is, or the American Association of this is doing or saying, please share this with your leaders, or I should say, and or if you have an ally who is in a leadership position who can also share that on your behalf, then that can be helpful as well. So we've done this with the School of Medicine, et cetera. So I'll look at what the AAMC is doing and what they're saying and sharing those documents back with the medical school. And they may have seen them, but they may not have seen the side of it connected to DEI or to JEDI, or, you know, another national organization may be doing some things that are specific to the science or specific to the discipline, but they might not have looked at what their own organization is even saying, or their own accrediting body is saying about diversity. And we can use that or utilize that, sometimes even invite a person from that organization in for a talk just to elevate and amplify the messaging. And I have found that that can help, because there are people who may think that, well, this is not an important topic, or that, you know, my particular area doesn't really value this in the same way that the organization I work with seems to try to make us value it, when in fact, it is valuable, it is being talked about, it is being put forward, but people may not necessarily be paying attention to it. So sometimes drawing attention in the direction can help, but also having someone to help whoever, I would say give us, you know, the CDOs of the organization more to do. Not that I really want more to do all the time, but we know that there's an, you know, unfortunately, I can say an seemingly unending to draw from. So, you know, enlist us as colleagues in that regard to help. I'm sure that there are people who are willing to raise the banner and to have the meetings and to sometimes be the spokespersons on behalf of others related to this, and can have those conversations so that they can come up and eventually move to policy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. How do we have those conversations? How do we cross collaborate? How do we take advantage of that? So this has been going great. And if the three of you can stay on, for all attendees that can stay on, we'll continue. I've been remiss in not asking my dear friend and colleague, Chris, to launch our poll. So there you go. Thank you, Chris. So please, 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 attendees, sorry, panelists, you can't vote. You can check it out and let me know privately. But please, attendees, vote for as many of those as you think you would like to see offered, whether you can attend or not, ones that you think would be beneficial. We look at this data quite a bit. I spend a good amount of time poring over this and looking at it webinar to webinar. And then, of course, are you interested in being a panelist as well? I love that when people say they are, or maybe not now, that's fine, or they know someone, and anyone can always reach out to me, jonathan.klain@bioraf.com. That's easier. Just click on bioraf.com and you can find me there. So that's very good. And because I hadn't done it yet, I'm going to share my the screen here and show you that I did take the time to actually do at least a fun little joke at Superman's expense. It usually is at Superman's expense here. So just want to get us into that mix. Here was what we were doing today. And the panelists all contributed an answer ahead of time. And so I did want to put that visible so that people could check it out for what is a really good brief idea for doing this potential overlap and cross benefits to it. And then lastly, we do have some coming up. So we are taking a holiday break. We recognize the proximity to the holidays will probably, people need that time for all sorts of things, which we encourage. So have a wonderful break. We're not done for today, folks. But on the 13th of January, we will come back. High energy materials, how well are you managing the risk? So things that have the potential to explode. We're going to do something a little different a couple of weeks after that. We're doing actually a product webinar on our module Chem Tracker for those that are interested in that. It's just a little bit different from our EH&S community webinar, so I wanted to make sure I did cover that. And then coming up on February 10th, a new one in our queue, designing or renovating labs, how do you avoid the problems? And we have a great group for that. And we're actually booking webinars into April already, folks. So we have a wonderful array set up for this. So let's go back. And I think Renetta, that was wonderful. And then Robert, what would you add to what Renetta said regarding Carmen's question, please?
I don't know if I can add anything to what Renetta said. No, seriously. I think she covered it. We could go to the next question if you want.
Sure. No, that's totally fine. Anthony, did you have anything else to cover in addition or not?
No, I think Dr. Tull was right on. Don't reinvent the wheel. Go to your associations, read Dr. Noble's report from the APLU. You could read mine from Stanford if you want, but I mean, they're out there and there's no reason you can't take those to show people. And also, there is money in it. If you notice my idea, the NIH and NSF have addendum grants for JEDI diversity training and expanding it into STEM up to 80 grand a piece. And right now at CSU, we actually have one of our AVPs of research is targeting this because we've been so successful at it. And we're trying to find out how our Office of Sponsored Programs can identify who's eligible for these addendum grants. And it turns out that's really hard based on the system we have. So, but yeah, I think Dr. Tull did a great job. Let's go to the next question.
Sure. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. I could keep going all day, but I have a feeling they won't allow me to do that. So, all right. Tracy asked a good question as well. Do you have suggestions on how to ensure that near misses for safety events, whatever we want to call them, close calls, et cetera, are being reported to environmental health and safety. And I think to Robert's comments and story, how do they also, and also Anthony and Renetta's, how do they not just go to EH&S, but then how do they also filter up to leadership and then filter back down into lessons learned? I have ideas about that. Has to do with stories as well, but I'm biased because that's what I study actually. So I don't know who would like to chime in first. I would leave it to the three of you.
I'll jump in really quickly and then turn over to the team. I believe it comes down to incentives and celebrations. One of the things that I've done at one of my previous institutions is that we always had a research celebration of people getting awards and carrying out discovery and science. And we did that year after year. And then it dawned on me, we're not celebrating the people who commit themselves to doing good compliance. So then I had staffs put in recommendations of faculty who embody a safety culture. I had faculty submit nominations for people who are uplifting the values of safety and compliance on campus. And then we had a compliance, research compliance and safety celebration where we gave awards, right? Everybody wants an Oscar. You give awards for doing awesome stuff. And so we celebrated, one, you have to have the infrastructure and the process of gathering this information and reporting it and all of that. But then we celebrated people for reporting near misses, for having an infrastructure that they protected individuals, that we allowed the faculty, we gave them their Oscar and gave them the opportunity to have the stage and talk about their safety culture in front of everybody. And faculty and academic institutions, they love award ceremonies. And so when you start doing that and then you put it in your campus newspaper and all of this, then everybody's like, well, I'm safe too. And so you start building this body of interest around doing the right thing. And that's a way of gaining more visibility and exposure. But I'm sure that the other team members have other ways to elevate this important point.
Sure. Renetta, would you like to go next? And then Anthony, as a safety culture coordinator, I'm sure you'll have plenty to add to it. So I want to give Renetta some space to add hers as well.
So just really quickly, and it's not as fun as the celebration side, which I think is wonderful. But one of the things that we have seen, at least at Davis, and this is in the sort of harassment prevention kind of situation, discrimination prevention, is that there are opportunities for reporting and reporting anonymously. And I think that what we're trying to do is to make it part of the culture to report different things that people may see, and so that no one is penalized for having reported something. No one feels like they are going to, again, be reprimanded or otherwise because they're the ones. And the reporting doesn't necessarily have to be done by someone who sees it, but even someone who's told about it can report outside of the individual, whether it's lab or individual group or division, anyone can do it. And then there are case monitors and caseworkers who will investigate. So I think that can be helpful. But one of the things that we saw at MIT, I think that was helpful, is sharing that no one was above the law. Because one of the things that was happening earlier is that a person in a higher position might do something that was sort of against safety protocol, and then no one would say anything for fear of, whatever position that person was in, having that person either, again, demote them or dismiss them from the lab. So they didn't want to be the one to say something when a PI or someone in charge was doing something that wasn't right. So creating a culture where no one is above the law, where anyone, who violates will be, brought in for questioning or correction, that can be helpful. But another thing is, if something is reported anonymously, it doesn't necessarily always have to be attributed to a person. It can be something that was seen or recognized, and we want to share what happened or what might happen, and even go a step further to say, and if this happens, then this can happen, and then whatever the next step is. So for all of us, we want to make sure that this does not take place. So here's how we can prevent it. as a group, as a division, as an organization, which in one sense can take a burden off of an individual person if that's where you want to go in terms of direction, but can help with safety overall.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Anthony, what would you like to add to this from your experiences and expertise doing safety culture at CSU?
Yeah, so I find that the way you report is the easiest way to report. And so what a lot of folks do is they'll have a colleague that they'll go outside and get a coffee with and do a debrief of you won't believe what happened. And we know who those folks are, and we try to convince them to also report it. Um, but what we want to do is we want to make the reporting easy. And so I put a link in the chat where one of the first things we did at CSU is we put everything onto one website, from how do you onboard into research, your JEDI training, your safety training, and all the reporting hotlines and phone numbers you need, whether it was, an animal reporting, a laser reporting, or a biosafety concern, or even a bias concern. We actually put that all together on one website so that our researchers could easily find it and interact with it. The other thing that I think is important is to show them the near reporting system and how it works. Walk them through it. This is what you're checking off, and this is how we use the data. If you check this off, this is what this triggers and how we help you. And you have to tell stories of how you help people become better. And so then they can go talk to their peers. And when you've got PI to PI discussion about, this system really helps me out, then that is a huge changeover from, somebody just going, oh man, safety's just this burden. No, they're going to say, oh, this helped my student and it was done this way and we know how to do it. So you want to make it easy for them, and you want them to want to engage it. And so, I would say if I had to pick somewhere to start, make it easy for them to report rather than trying to find, an IACOOK website, an IRB website, a chem management website. Try and make a central repository.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, ask my panelists a favor, our panelists a favor. I think of you as mine because I just love you all. So I'm going to ask you Kevin's question next. It might be the last one we get to today. But Glenda's question, maybe if you do have any books, she asked about any good books on this topic. If you don't mind just putting that, if you think of one, type it into the chat if you don't mind, folks. That including attendees, please, but our panelists, if you do have any, please feel free to do that. So let me get to Kevin's question here, which I think is a good one considering everything we're talking about, folks. So what Kevin asks is there's a great emphasis on impairment, suicide, which I've had to deal with multiple times throughout my career, violence, addiction, disability, et cetera, right? All of these very tough things. EHS, Safety Industrial Hygiene Association meetings discuss this routinely. I have seen that. On the one hand, he says, good for us to be aware and effective in anticipating, recognizing, measuring, and controlling, four of our words that we operate by in safety and health, and controlling any factor or hazard contributing. On the other hand, and here's the question that Kevin asked, which I like, this can, I'll add, Kevin, this can appear or feel to others as, or to ourselves, as mission creep, or I will add, not staying in our lane, as I have been told at times, for EHS into HR, turf, and if HR is dropping the ball, then it's really a sustainability solution for EHS, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we have these conversations? The three of you really represent wonderful leaders at your institution, in your areas and in other areas. So how do we go about trying to work through, I won't say around, but through these concerns about mission creep, staying in one's lane? And, when I was an embedded safety professional, this was what I did. And I just reached out. I was fearless and I didn't know what the word boundary meant, but not everyone feels that way. So what would be your sage advice in this area? And I started at the very beginning of this by going to you, Renetta, first. So if you don't mind, Renetta, I will go to you first again, please.
Okay, thank you. So just really quickly, I'll take it from a DEI standpoint.
Mhm.
The things that our Chancellor, Gary May, often talks about is that DEI work is everyone's work. So I'm going to go in the opposite direction, which is that there are some things where I believe it's not sort of mission or scope creep. There are some things that all of us, no matter where we are, need to be connected to or concerned about, right? So I'm in DEI. That doesn't mean that, I don't talk about mental health. That doesn't mean that I don't know what the mental health resources are that I can share, whether someone's in crisis or not in crisis. And so I think that making sure that people know what the resources are that can be used if something sort of goes beyond where a person's level of either comfort or expertise is, then they know who to call in or who to connect with to partner with them on either having the conversation or to bring the situation to the next step. So it could be, and I think someone wrote it in the chat about inviting HR or inviting people in as, again, partners, collaborators to have certain conversations so that people know who they can talk to, know who to call, know who to connect to, that can be really important. And it goes back to developing relationships, which I think Patrick also brought up in the chat early on about how these kinds of things take a lot of time and effort to build relationships deep into the organization. But it helps with people not feeling overwhelmed in areas where they don't necessarily have expertise, but it allows at least people to sort of get to the next step and at least know that somebody's there to at least listen, help, and get them to the right people to assist.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Renetta. Robert, how about you? And Anthony, I'm going to give you the last word on this question, and then I will do our wrap up. Since it started with you, I want to end with you as well. So Robert, please.
Yeah, no, it's fair. So I don't believe in lanes. I think when we do that, then we limit our ability to serve our institutions. And so what I would say is, I guess I've crafted my career and profession around blurring the lines. When I think about your question, I'm reframing it as mental health and research. And when you think about mental health and research, then I automatically went to our annual health assessment. And so now I'm thinking, well, what questions do I ask in the annual health assessment of all of our employees? And do we ask about mental health? Because that impacts the capability of carrying out research or laboratory safety matters. So what I think what we need to do as professionals is you take the topic and incorporate it into your lane to where no one can tell you it's not. And so it's us reframing our purpose. And so now mental health, just like your physical disabilities and your eyesight and everything else that we hearing, right? Audiology, we have to do that. And we check everything. Why don't we, as part of our annual health assessment, ask about mental health needs and use that as part of our occupational health program? That's what I would say. And I wouldn't allow anyone, because we seem to be the experts in our respective fields, tell you what doesn't fit in your field. Is what I would do. But I've done that my whole career. I've always pushed back. So the whole lane thing, it just means that people are cautious and they're worried if somebody looks over their shoulders about what they're doing, and I think that I think that disrupts our institutions on the progress that needs to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish I had had the opportunity in my career to work with you, Robert. I think we would have been co-enabling each other, definitely. Anthony, last word on this question, please, sir, and then I'll do a wrap up.
Yeah, so I want to play off of what Robert said about mental health. So when we think about mental health, our closest coworker knows us the best, and can probably recognize changes in our mental health more than anyone else, or our spouse, right? But our coworker does not have the skills and the resources to be a counselor or a psychologist. And so we have to give that coworker the power to help their fellow coworker. And at CSU, I'm going to promote CSU again. We're really proud of this program called Tell Someone, where anyone can call in or email to the system and write about their colleague, whether it's a fellow student or coworker, and say, I'm concerned for these reasons, and can you please go make contact with that person? And so it removes the burden from the person who's recognized it to a system that can actually help the person in need. And one time it was utilized on a director at a very high level. And the next meeting, that director came back and the director kind of figured out that maybe it was this group that called because there was a breakdown in this meeting. And the director said, I am not more proud of my group for taking care of me. You know, it wasn't a negative. Someone called to take care of me. And that builds that safety rapport. And the safer you feel with those around you, the more your communication bandwidth grows. And so as we talk about all these things, you know, the more we normalize difficult conversations, the larger our safety bandwidth communication grows. And so whether I'm talking about chemical safety, and I'm going to let you know about these other systems in mental health or biological safety, I think it's very important, especially as our researchers become more interdisciplinary. We didn't talk about this today, but there's researchers going from chemistry to biology, and they think because they're really good in their area, they can do another area really good. And they're not aware of IRBs or IBCs. And so we have researchers moving from an uncontrolled area to a highly controlled area. And we just got to make sure that the resources are there for them and that the hammer doesn't come down as bad as it could when they come to you. In some cases, like Dr. Nobles, there's a federal, there are federal requirements that you're about to run into. But in a lot of cases, you can backtrack and help fix. And I really hope that we've emphasized today that we want to help the person, and that's going to lead, I think, to a safer environment.
That was great. Thank you. And it's a great setup. I just have a couple of quick words and we're going to be ending. This was so wonderful. Let me get to my thank yous in 1 minute, please. So towards this conversation about mental health and suicide prevention and all, and I've prevented a student from committing suicide twice. When I was an undergrad at UMass, I responded to 2 suicides very, very sadly. And when I got to UC Davis, and you're probably familiar with this, Renetta, I saw a listing for gatekeeper training. And so gatekeeper training, for those unfamiliar with it, and I took it with Professor Carolyn Dua, was we all of us, all of you on this webinar play significant roles and are probably in very good positions to have these conversations that our 3 panelists have been talking about, to recognize signs. And so this gatekeeper training that I took, which was really wonderful, was devoted to helping students, staff, faculty, and anyone else recognize signs, know what to say, how to have the conversation, how to help people in need get to the help that they need, which is counseling, which is always a wonderful place to go. I have a final quote and then my thank yous. When people would ask me why I focus so much on the person when I was an embedded safety professional, especially at Arizona State, where I was much longer, I would tell them this simply: when I protect the individual, I am protecting the institution. However, when I am protecting the institution, I am not necessarily protecting the individual. So you can see why I focus so strongly on the individual. And I think that has been said far better than I by all 3 of our wonderful panelists. I just feel so strongly about this. Thank you all so much, Renetta, Robert, and Anthony. Thank you for spending so much of your time and effort and energy today. This has been a wonderful conversation. On behalf of everyone here at BioRaft, we appreciate it very, very much. The attendees have been wonderful. Please help me thank our wonderful panelists. And with purpose, we put JEDI and Safety Culture Part 2 as a possible another one. We're doing a Part 2 on a couple of other webinars as well, so I would not be surprised. This is part of our efforts here at BioRaft as well, and I can't say any more than thank you all so much. All right, and with that, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you for coming, and come back again. Have a wonderful rest of your month. We will see you in the new year with more wonderful webinars and fantastic panelists like we had today. Take care, everyone. Signing off.